it's just so important. And I mean, that's why I'm like, one of the reasons I'm drawn to teaching it is like, these concepts are critical and everyone should know them because it is life and death and it's our future and it's our social structure that we're talking about, you know, designing and maintaining. And it tends to be taught in a way that's just totally opaque, you know? I mean, economics has a reputation for being difficult and mathematical and, you know, I mean, we have this huge gender problem in economics where it's like all men. And, you know, I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, that economists have been content to kind of just do their thing and play their role and play with their little mathematical puzzle boxes and stuff. And I don't know, for me and the rising generation, it's a lot bigger and more important than that. It is our future and it's our society and it matters.
Welcome to Activist MMT, a podcast about nonviolent MMT direct activism, introducing modern monetary theory to the world and conversations about learning MMT together. I'm your host, Jeff Epstein. Today I'm talking with Sam Levey. Sam is a PhD student in economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, UMKC, and a research scholar for the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. He is also a co-founder of DeficitOwls, a prominent MMT activist account on Twitter, and a YouTube channel containing nearly 200 short videos demonstrating fundamental concepts of MMT. Sam and I discuss the successes and lessons of a prominent activist, the growing pains of a burgeoning and disruptive community, and advice for activists who are just starting out and those considering taking the leap into a formal education. So welcome to the premiere episode of Activist MMT. Before we get to my conversation with Sam, I'm going to take this first show as an opportunity to introduce myself and how I got to MMT. In episode 2, I will give a brief introduction to modern monetary theory itself. So I am the non-billionaire, non-pedophile, non-dead Jeff Epstein. Yes, this has been a trying few months online. I am a classically trained singer, a former computer programmer, and I'm the father of 2 little boys, 10 and 13. I am also a hardcore Bernie Sanders progressive. In early 2016, I left a high-paying job in order to volunteer for his presidential campaign full-time for 5 months. I ran with Bernie on the ballot in my county, and because of the nature of New Jersey politics, I was one of only around 40 candidates in the country to be personally endorsed by the senator. I also served as a New Jersey State pledged delegate for Bernie Sanders at the Democratic National Convention in July of 2016 in Philadelphia. At the convention, I co-founded Citizens Media TV in order to live stream the proceedings from the Bernie Sanders point of view, with a handful of delegates on the inside and supporters on the outside. By the end of convention week, our coverage reached 1.5 million people. After the campaign was over, I was selected as one of less than 60 of the first batch of finalists for brand new Congress, out of more than 1,500 nominations across the country. Before discovering Bernie Sanders in August of 2015, I was politically asleep. I voted Democrat because I was told that Democrats were the good guys and Republicans were the bad guys. What Bernie taught me was that a major cause of society's problems is not any particular flavor of political stripe, but the corrupting influence of money. He also taught me that, although I am personally, individually responsible for my own problems and anxieties, our government is responsible for creating a society and environment in which those problems are minimized. Despite my age, I consider this experience with Bernie Sanders during the 2016 campaign to be a milestone in my transition from adolescence to adulthood. Like Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. before him, Bernie Sanders believes the solution to be an economic Bill of Rights, a dignified job, wage, benefits, and retirement, free healthcare and education, affordable housing, and a livable environment. We have been demanding and preaching about these things for generations, yet here we are in 2019, more desperate than ever and on the brink of climate and societal collapse. And we still don't have any of these things. So why not? Why don't we have them? This is the question that I started to ask. Why don't we have what we need to not die? In February of 2018, I got my answer. Modern monetary theory, or MMT. Before discovering MMT, I was economically asleep. Like almost all of us, I was thoroughly convinced that actually getting what we need to prevent and stop our death, suffering, bankruptcy, and unemployment would somehow be worse than our death, suffering, bankruptcy, and unemployment. This is how I understand mainstream economics or neoliberal economics, or as I call it, hopeless economics to be. MMT demonstrates that our governments are capable of vastly more than we are told. That is its fundamental insight. So in February of 2018, I was talking local politics on the phone with my friend Jeff Ginter. Jeff and I actually talk about how we met in episode 3. Jeff interrupted me and said, "You really need to understand how the economy works." He proceeded to talk to me for an hour. Before then, I never cared about or followed economics at all, let alone heard of MMT. Economics, I thought, was just not for me. Because of this, I was an empty vessel. I was not confident in my hopeless economics, so I had little to refute what Jeff was telling me. After our initial conversation, I saw some big pieces hanging in the air, and I could tell they were a big deal, but none of them connected, so I found it very confusing. Over the course of the next month, Jeff and I did 2 live streams on the Facebook page Real Progressives, so Jeff could continue to introduce me to the basics. It was a special experience, because many people who already knew MMT witnessed my eyes open, and I met some excellent and helpful allies in the movement. So once again, my life was changed, this time by MMT. I started interviewing people to learn more, and I interviewed others to introduce them to what I already knew. I soon started a weekly live stream on Real Progressives where I gave the same introduction to MMT over and over again for months, each time improved based on the incredibly helpful feedback and support that I received from members of Real Progressives. A few months later, I approached stand-up comedian and progressive video journalist Graham Elwood. He invited me onto his YouTube show for what was a magical experience. I, along with his viewers, got to watch Graham's eyes open, and in turn, his viewers became more friendly and enthusiastic about MMT. I have since appeared on Graham's show 6 more times, and have also arranged appearances by PhD economists Stephen Hale and Fidel Kaboub. I informally presented a much sharper version of what I showed Graham at the September 2018 second annual International MMT Conference in New York City. I have since rewritten this presentation, the most recent version being much deeper, accurate, and interesting. I have presented this new version regularly in public and in private. Finally, a personal note. As those who know me best will understand, my biggest challenge is my emotions. I am smart and ambitious, and I have strong opinions. But because of my personal history, my emotions are sometimes not capable of handling the consequences of my ambitions. A big part of my problem until now has been trying to pretend in public that this is not the case. I have a long way to go, and I have to believe that I'm not the only one experiencing this. So thank you especially to those who have along the way forgiven me some of my, let's say, more raw emotions. Speaking of ambition, I am now applying for a master's degree in economics at John Jay University in New York City. I was going to start in January, but I've decided to postpone this until September. I am going to spend this time reading papers and books and interviewing MMTers in an effort to get up to speed before I begin my formal education. So if all goes as planned, I will have just begun my master's when I see you at next year's 4th Annual International MMT Conference in Washington, D.C. Thank you for listening, and now on to my conversation with Sam Levey. You can contact me on Twitter or Facebook, and you can email me at activistmmt@gmail.com. If you're enjoying Activist MMT even a fraction as much as I enjoy creating it, and if you're safe and secure and happen to be lucky enough to have some public deficit kicking around in your pocket, I hope you might consider becoming a monthly patron of Activist MMT. For as little as $1 a month, you'll get exclusive content and updates, several days of early access to every episode, and for some, super early access weeks and sometimes even months in advance. You can start by going to patreon.com/activistmmt. That's Patreon. Whatever you can afford, I would be very grateful. Thank you. Now, on to our conversation.
Sam Levey, thank you for coming on. Really nice to talk with you.
Thanks for having me.
Actually, why don't we start from the beginning? Could you just briefly introduce yourself and how you got into MMT?
Sure, okay. Life story. So I was born in a log cabin. I'm totally kidding. Let's see. I was kind of in an unrelated field. I was doing audio engineering for musical theater, which is a fun time. But I kind of knew that path for me had an expiration date, I guess. I was kind of slowly getting bored of it, and I could see that eventually I knew I wasn't going to be able to keep doing it. And I had always been interested in economics, and especially the 2008 crisis, made me more interested. How could it not? And so kind of when I got out of college in 2013, 2012, somewhere in there, I started kind of teaching myself economics on the side, and it quickly became obvious that mainstream economics basically had nothing to say about what was going on in this tumultuous time. And so I found my way to heterodox material, and so I had kind of just been sifting through various schools of thought and seeing what different folks had to say and trying to pull wisdom from each. And I stumbled onto this MMT thing, and I think I heard Professor Steve Keen mention it in passing in one of his video lectures, and I'm a curious guy, and it got me curious what that was about. And at the time, material was somewhat hard to come by, and kind of the only real thing I could find that I was sure was relevant was Professor Ray's 1998 book, Understanding Modern Money. So I figured I'd give that a read. And if you've read that book, you know that it is a tough book. I think like chapter 3 in the book is a pretty long, detailed exposition on the history of money going back thousands of years. So there were multiple times in that chapter when I was kind of like, I'm not sure I'm going to make it through this book. I might just put it down as getting kind of dull. But I kept through it. I finished the chapter, and then I kept going in the rest of the book, and I'm glad I did, because by the time I finished the book, it was like a light bulb had gone off. My eyes were open, and I remember thinking, if this is true, it's huge news, and everybody needs to know about it. And so the first part of that, I wasn't sure that it was true. And so after reading that book, I kind of started consuming MMT material voraciously, just trying to get as much other reading in. I had concerns, I had questions, I had doubts, very skeptical. And I think I ended up reading like 5 more books and, a dozen papers or so before I was kind of like, really most of my questions are answered and my concerns are satisfied. And yeah, I think this thing is the real deal. And sometime around then, I was on Facebook just sort of stumbling around, and I found my way onto this page for the Tea Party Patriots. So, Americans remember half a decade ago there was this Tea Party movement that was a big deal in conservative politics. And I remember I found this Facebook page and I was thinking, well, if the Tea Party has a Facebook page, how come us Deficit Owls don't have a Facebook page? So I started one, and that was kind of the birth of Deficit Owls. And the original goal was to provide materials that people could use to teach each other. So like I said, my reaction was, this is huge news and everybody needs to know about it. But at the time, the teaching materials were pretty sparse. I mean, you could read a big, thick economics book. You could watch a 3-hour video lecture on YouTube. And I was kind of like, well, nobody's going to watch that. Nobody's going to read those. We need shorthand stuff. So, one of the first things I started doing was cutting up those video lectures into sort of consumable size chunks that, answered a single question. And that has become the Deficit Owls YouTube library, which I think we've got close to 200 videos, each one on sort of some small individual aspect of MMT. The shortest ones are like a minute, and the longest ones on a little more deeper dives into topics are like 25 to 30 minutes. So those are supposed to be teaching materials. You're in a conversation with somebody about MMT, and you can use that video, so you don't have to repeat it all. It's kind of there and definitive, and then other things kind of along those lines of creating simple teaching materials. I started making graphics. I kind of had to teach myself, and every part of this has been me saying, okay, there's a need and I've got to fill it, but it's things I don't know how to do. I guess I'm going to have to teach myself. I had to teach myself how to do this video editing, teach myself how to do some graphic design, simple graphic design, to make these little explainer graphics about various aspects of MMT. The idea being that, if you're in conversation with somebody in social media, you don't have to go through the explanation yourself. You just say, see the graphic, attached, and it's there already. So I started doing that and getting kind of deep into this MMT community. And like I said, my earlier career, I was kind of looking for an exit door. And I guess that moment came when I applied to the master's program here at UMKC, which is a great program. Let me do the pitch, I guess. It's heterodox interdisciplinary program, and they accept people like me who are passionate about the field and but not necessarily coming from an economics background. My undergrad was not in economics. My career before that was not in economics. But, so coming to this program has been a great opportunity for me to take classes with MMT originals like Scott Fulweiler and Matthew Forstater, and also learn about other traditions in heterodox economic thought, like institutionalist economics and others. That program, if you do it full time, is about 1.5 years, and I kind of decided that I think this academic route is probably the thing I want to do. I'm very passionate about teaching, which I hope comes across, and I kind of want to go down that professor route and teach the next generation.
So you're a PhD student currently. When did you start your master's around?
Let's see, what year is it? Must have been, I think I applied in 2016, I want to say, or maybe late 2015, and I had to do a couple semesters of like kind of online basic undergraduate coursework, like intro to macro kind of stuff. Before then, I came out here for the master's program for real life. I think in 2017.
Okay. So how far are you into your PhD? When do you finish that?
So, technically I'm in my second semester because my first semester was last spring, but the coursework that I did during the master's program, all of it counts for the PhD. So a lot of, most of the time when people ask, I'll say I'm in my third year.
Okay. So when do you finish around?
Yeah, great question. I like to tell people probably the end of time, but, hopefully
Okay.
before that. I don't know. It's kind of, I finish my coursework probably in about a year, and then I work on my dissertation sort of however long that takes, and that's all very much up in the air. Could be fast, could be slow. Who knows?
I know this is not a definitive answer, but how long do dissertations sort of expect it to take?
My understanding is that in economics, it's typical for your whole doctoral program to be like on average 6 years. And I think some people go faster, some people go slower, some people, never finish or whatever. So in addition to teaching itself, teaching and research, is there more beyond that? Like, do you have particular goals that you're looking for? I think the kind of success story for PhD students is like you get a tenure track faculty position at a university, and best case is a university with PhD students with a graduate program. A lot of the times, in economics, for heterodox economists, that's hard. There's only like a small handful of schools in the U.S. that teach heterodox economics, and most mainstream economics schools are like actively hostile to heterodox economists. I think that was more true in the past, and it's changing now. But a lot of the graduates from the heterodox PhD programs kind of go on to teach at four-year liberal arts colleges that have more of an interdisciplinary heterodox focus and are more welcoming to, somebody from outside the mainstream of economics.
I mean, as far as I understand, it's UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, where you are. There's Levey, which is near sort of northern New York. There's John Jay, the New School, and Stony Brook. Those are the only ones that I'm aware of that are very friendly to MMT.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't know too much about John Jay. Levey, they only have a master's program. They don't have a PhD program there. The New School has a PhD program, and then there's also like Utah, there's Colorado, there's American University.
American, I believe, is in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that's right.
Huh. I didn't know that. Okay. Actually, I'd like to take a tangent briefly because I'm intrigued personally by audio engineering. I edit podcasts, but I'm also a classically trained singer. I've edited a lot of songs. And you said that you said that you were an audio engineer for musicals. Does that mean that during the actual live production that you were, mixing or whatever you call it, the live show, or were you doing more than that?
Yeah, that's right.
What about a recording studio or editing or anything beyond the actual live experience?
So when I was starting to go down this audio route, I was, the impetus, I guess I really am telling my life story here. The impetus for it was that in grade school, I was very much into music and playing music and performing and stuff, but then I kind of decided I didn't really want that lifestyle. I wanted something with steadier income. So I considered this,
steady income. I mean, how greedy of you.
So I was kind of like this audio route. I could stay close to music, be, music adjacent, but also maybe make a little more money. So at the beginning, I was kind of experimenting with every different kind of audio. I mean, I took some courses in college on acoustic engineering and sound for video. Actually, I only spent a week in the sound for video games class. I couldn't hack that one. Sound for film, live sound, studio recording and stuff, mixing and mastering. So I've dipped my fingers into all of those just a little bit, but I kind of decided that live sound was sort of the place for me. And I think that's because, one thing that you have to, if you make a studio version of something, one thing you have to do is make a very definite decision about when you're done. Like, we have mixed the song, we are finished mixing it, It is ready to go. And I am very bad at making those kinds of decisions. You know, I'm
like
sort
you,
of the kind
like
of
you
person.
always want to tweak it. You always want to like keep listening to it.
Yeah. I'm always like, oh, but is it good enough? Could we do this one more thing or that? Yeah. So I was kind of like, live sound makes that decision for you. Don't have to worry about it. The show's over. It's over. Moving on. You know. So that was kind of the personality quirk that made that more suitable for me. And then I ended up kind of moving towards musical theater specifically. I started out actually just doing kind of general live events, a lot of concerts, lectures, dance shows, you know, whatever else happens in a space.
Your own equipment, or do you use the equipment at the place?
Generally the equipment of the venue. It is enormously expensive to own that stuff. You know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I actually started to get bored of that kind of stuff too. I mean, playing music is a lot of fun when you're playing it, but when you're mixing a live show, the fun part is kind of the sound check when you put it all together and you like kind of try to create this coherent whole that will be the acoustic experience of the show. But then during the actual show, a lot of what you do is just stand there and babysit the equipment. You know, maybe a few tweaks here and there. You want to push up the instrument that's taking a solo, or this blend isn't working, tweak that EQ or something. But a lot of it really is just kind of standing there. And I got bored of that too. You know, it's like, it's a lot of fun if you're getting paid to watch a show that's a great show with a band you're really into. But if it's a band you're not really into, then you're just standing there. When I originally
contacted you on email, I mean, we've encountered each other on Twitter, especially for quite a while now. But when I first wrote you on email, your email signature is audio engineer, and I was very surprised by that. I can relate. It's very. I mean, I didn't take any courses or anything, but I'm mildly competent with editing, you know, podcasts and some songs, and you know, the extent of what I do is I'll compress, and then I'll reduce noise, which is get rid of static, and then I'll add some reverb. I mean, that's pretty much the extent of what I do, is beyond the editing itself. But it is hard. It is hard because when you edit a song, I never do live. I only do, you know, post-production. That you need to listen in different speakers because it's a completely different experience, like in your car, in headphones, in a box radio. And it is hard to let go. It is hard to, you know, I feel like I have to keep cycling between my car and the headphones and the radio and making sure that it sounds good in all of those. And I agree, it's a very hard decision to know when to finally let go and that I'm done.
Right. And in live sound, that choice gets made for you simply by the ticking of the clock. The show's over. It's too late to go back and edit it.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's cool that we have that similar experience that's so far off of MMT itself.
I mean, I guess, you know, if there's one common consistent thread here in this life story I'm telling for you, it's that I get bored pretty easy. So that was why I kind of ended up in this musical theater thing too, because it's a much more active role than mixing a concert. And probably I would guess that nobody who's listening to this podcast has thought about this or realized it, but if you go see a live performance of a musical, you know, the actors are wearing microphones on their person somewhere, a lot of the time actually in their hair, but sometimes, you know, over their ear, near their mouth, or in their clothes or something. And those microphones are omnidirectional, so they're picking up everything that's going on, and they're pretty far from the person's mouth. So that means you have to turn them up sort of loud to be able to get a good level out. Which means they're also picking up other things going on stage. And for reasons that I'm not really going to get into, if you have multiple microphones picking up the same sound source, it tends to sound bad. They all get added together, and you get, you know, weird phase cancellation and stuff, and you can tell, and it sounds bad when you've got a bunch of microphones picking up the same thing. So if you're a mixer for a musical theater show, what you're trying to do, as much as humanly possible, is have the fewest number of microphones turned on at any given time, which if one person is speaking, then you only need that microphone on. So really what you're trying to do is, as the show goes on, you're trying to turn the microphone on of the person who's about to speak right before they do it, and turn their microphone off as quick as you can as soon as they're done speaking and turn the next person's microphone on.
You need to memorize the real intricacies of the script.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called active mixing or line by line mixing, and you really are just. I always felt like I was playing a gigantic, $1 million musical instrument, where I'm going along with the performers, and you're actively turning their microphones on, actively setting levels to try and get the balance, dynamics, emotional, kind of flow that you want to the show. And it's wild, and you make a mistake and you don't get the mic on fast enough and you cut somebody's line off, or you don't hear their line at all, and then the audience kind of turns their head back to the guy at the mixing board like, what happened, man? Not
to mention mistakes. If they mess up a line, then you obviously can't know what's going on.
Exactly. So it's a high pressure, very active role that I enjoyed quite a bit and is fun, but then even then I actually started to get kind of bored of that.
Wow. That actually sounds rather stressful. Like
it is. It's very stressful.
All right. So my last question regarding this is, what is your instrument? What is you said you played? At that time, when I was like high school and stuff, mostly saxophone, kind of woodwinds. These days, I don't end up pulling the sax out too often. I'm trying to get back into piano, but, a handful of things. I was just kind of a generalist, like hand me an instrument and come back in a month and I'll know how to play it. That's great. Okay. So you said that you get bored easily. So why, MMT, you've made a long-term commitment. So why do you see this, or what about it is you have faith that it won't be boring?
It might be boring, but I think it's really, really important. And then economics is more than just MMT, right? Like that's one of the things that I'm confident I'm not going to get bored of economics because it's just so big. And if you get bored of one part of economics, you can go to another part because there's this idea called economic imperialism, that economics as a discipline has tried to conquer all the other disciplines, inject our way into the social sciences in general, into political science, into sociology. So, you can be an economist and you can be talking about money, you can be talking about jobs, but you can also talk about, social interactions. You can talk about sex. You can talk about drugs. You can talk about, name an issue, and economists have something to say about it. A lot of the times they're using neoclassical methods, and it's just kind of, bullshit, but it's fair game.
And the small issue of that economics is life and death for billions. It's life and death.
100%. It's just so important. And that's why I'm like, one of the reasons I'm drawn to teaching it is like, these concepts are critical and everyone should know them because it is life and death and it's our future and it's our social structure that we're talking about, designing and maintaining. And it tends to be taught in a way that's just totally opaque, economics has a reputation for being difficult and mathematical and, we have this huge gender problem in economics where it's like all men. And, I think a lot of that has to do with, that economists have been content to kind of just do their thing and play their role and play with their little mathematical puzzle boxes and stuff. And I don't know, for me and the rising generation, it's a lot bigger and more important than that. It is our future and it's our society and it matters.
So I'm an MMT activist. You're an MMT activist, but you're on your way to now being an expert, whether a scholar or economist. And so I'm now applying to go for a master's program. So you're a few steps ahead of me on the path of where I want to be. So I'd like to know, let's start with activism. So you're DeficitOwls, you are a prominent activist on Twitter. And that you said with Christian and Patricia on the MMT podcast, that we're all on the same team, even if we seriously disagree with each other. If we want to have a society in a decade or 2 decades or whatever it is, we need to understand that we're in this together. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts of how you came to the style that you have, what that experience has been like for you, like particularly like when people are rude back to you, you're still not, how do you take that we're still on the same team even though,
Good question. I mean, well, I can think of like one kind of formative experience I had when I was an undergrad. I took a class. The class was called Los Angeles, the City, the Novel, the Movie. And we actually did very little of anything that would resemble Los Angeles, the City, the Novel, the Movie. Kind of the professor just used the class as like personal soapbox to impart his values onto the next generation, but what he was talking about for almost a whole semester, I guess, was empathy and relating to other people and, putting yourself in their shoes and that kind of thing. And so one of the things we had to do for the class was we had a project where we had to go out and interview strangers. So just like stop somebody on the street or on a train or in the coffee shop or whatever and talk to them for, 15, 20 minutes or 30 minutes, however long they'll talk to you for. And so we had a set of questions just kind of designed to like get in their head, like who is this person? What is their experience like? How do they understand the world? Like, what are the troubles they face day to day? Just kind of blank slate, what are other people and what is their story like? And that kind of thing and experiences like that, I think repeatedly have reinforced for me this idea that like, each person is kind of the hero of their own story. And for the most part, people, the vast majority of people are really just going through life, just kind of trying to make ends meet and make things make sense in their day to day. And, everybody's sort of the product of where they came from and the decisions they've made. And so vilifying people for the things they believe or for the social climate that they live in has never made any sense to me. Like, we have this huge tribalism problem these days. And I think that is what really creates so much of the animosity you see of people like they feel like they belong to these groups, like to, whatever it is, the Democrats or the leftists or the Republicans or the libertarians or whatever. And, I think that's people just looking for connection and looking for community in a society that really doesn't provide it. And so there's a positive part of that, of people building some connection and feeling more supported. And then there's the negative side too of like those boundaries have been defined too narrowly so that, for the libertarians, the Democrats they're just off limits. They're like a whole alien society, and that's the way we treat each other these days as kind of insiders and outsiders. And, I guess that experience of trying to construct somebody else's worldview, put yourself in their shoes and see how they understand the world, has helped emphasize to me that those boundaries are just they're just made up. They're social constructions and they're not even like long-term things. They're just like they've been the product of the last few decades, and it wasn't like that before, or that we had boundaries but different boundaries, I'd like to live in a society that treats everybody with respect and dignity, and I don't think that's going to happen until we kind of sell ourselves and each other on that idea. And in a society that treated everybody with respect and dignity, we wouldn't have these sort of boundaries, or not nearly as much at least, because, our group identity, the way we see each other, would cut across that kind of thing. And yeah, I don't know. So this notion that we're all on the same team is very important to me, I guess. And part of it is moral, but part of it is strategic also. I mean, so much of the conversations that we have as MMTers with non-MMTers, you see us just making absolutely no progress so much of the time. It's just butting heads and yelling at each other, and I don't see that as strategically effective either. We're not getting anywhere with those kinds of conversations, so the only kind of conversation that really works, I think, at this point is the kind where you do something to get the other person to listen to you, people don't listen to you because you yell at them louder, then they usually just kind of retrench and draw, redraw the lines even thicker. I mean, to get people to listen to you, you have to kind of reach out to them, and you have to, court them a bit. You have to, sort of strategically indicate that you're willing to listen and willing to have a conversation with them where you treat them with respect, and then people respond a little better. They'll say, okay, maybe there's something here. This person seems reasonable. They believe something. Maybe it's reasonable. I'll entertain the notion. So I think it's strategically more successful too.
You gain their trust. They're not going to listen to you until they trust you. That's how I see it. And I don't know who said this. Someone recently somewhat recently said this, that we need more diplomats and less assassins. And I have never seen you lose your cool. Of course you have. I don't doubt that you have. But online as DeficitOwls, I have not really seen you lose your cool. And I'm sure that people have been disrespectful to you. And actually, let me just ask you. People have certainly, called you crazy or whatever. And I'm curious how you take that as, yes, we're on the same team, but this person is being a jerk. Like, how do you just sort of personally take that and deal with that? At what point do you back out? At what point do you keep going? And
yeah, I mean, it's definitely, sometimes you get in a conversation and you can kind of tell, like, no matter what you say, the conversation's not going to go anywhere. And at that point, sometimes I'm like, well, thanks for chatting. Have a good night. Kind of no point to continuing this one, but just how to deal with it, like emotionally for me, I guess it's just like, I just don't see it as that person's fault most of the time. I mean, yes, they're choosing to be a jerk and they didn't have to make that choice, but also they're living in a system that isolates people and that pits people against each other. And these online platforms really don't help at all, making them, they're anonymous and they're short form. It's like practically designed to get people angry at each other. So when people do get angry, I guess I just don't see it as that person's fault so much. It's like, to not get angry, you almost have to like actively rebel against the system, So,
don't take it personally.
Yeah, not usually. I mean, and it really is the system. Sometimes on a couple of occasions I've been in conversations with people who are just downright disrespectful, and then I'll say, even sometimes the other person suggested it, but it's usually me who says, well, why don't we take this somewhere else? Let's go to email. Let's put it in private, in long form, kind of just, make it a more intimate conversation setting. And then those people just become the nicest people.
They're performing for the public. It's interesting. I had never thought of that.
Yeah, exactly. I had one person who was really just like hurling swear words at me. And I think that person was the one who suggested, you know what, let's talk by email. And then we chatted by email, and this person just became the nicest, most polite, person I'd encountered in a long time. And I guess it shouldn't be that surprising given kind of the way I'm thinking about this stuff. But, it's still kind of shocking when that happens it really is these systems and these settings that push people to act in these ways that seem so objectionable. And, you change the setting and you change the behavior.
Interesting. Yeah. There is a significant element of the activist community that calls people stupid. They call people stupid, and they're exasperated. And I agree. I don't agree with the emotion and with the insults, but I agree with the content of what they're saying. But it's like you said before, it's like, what do we want to do? What is our goal here? Our goal is to get people onto our side. And it's one thing to not convince somebody, but it's another thing to say you're an idiot, and then they're definitely never going to be convinced. It's like there's neutral, which is, I'm sorry this didn't work out. We agree to disagree. But then there's also you're an idiot, and that pushes them far beyond neutral. So your style is that is the style that I think is most effective. So because even if you lose,
I appreciate that.
Even if you lose, it just leaves things at neutral, and they see you as I disagree with you, but I appreciate how respectful you've been.
Yeah, and that's a nice experience, and just the way I see it, it's like at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to persuade people, So it's our responsibility to do that the best we can and to be the most effective that we can at it. It is not their responsibility to take what we're saying as gospel and just accept it. You know, if we come at it with that attitude, then we are going to lose.
And from, you know, the style of the diplomat style is, I want to convince them, but I'll be okay if I make no progress here. Which in a way is progress. You know, you're leaving it for the future potentially. You set the seed.
Yeah.
So,
you know, I'm very sympathetic to the people who are impatient as well. I mean, you know, we've been doing this for years, and it seems like it's so hard to make any progress. So I can't say that I'm not, you know, not sympathetic to that. And also, like, society affects
them. I'm sorry, society affects them just as much as it affects the people who think that we're crazy. So it's not like they are on the same side of us, even though we disagree with their style. And sometimes different styles is a very good thing because listeners have different styles as well. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, like, I've had these experiences too of banging my head against the wall, and it seems like we're not getting anywhere. And also, you know, one point that gets raised is just how serious these issues are. It's life or death for millions of people, billions of people. And it's, you know, who is going to be able to feed their kids at the end of the night. So I don't want to downplay the importance of this stuff, but, you know, if the attitude we have is just purely one of, like, we are morally righteous, so the flock must listen to us, then yeah, I just think it's not going to work. And then and then the end result of that is going to be even worse than where we started.
Can you share a success story, a particularly successful story, experience that you've had as an activist, and also on the other side, like something that went wrong, that you might do differently, or that you've seen other people do, and that you might suggest some advice for that?
Sure. You know, like I said to you before the call, I do always feel a little bit weird being called an activist, because I think that's not so much how I think of myself. I really think of myself as perpetually, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I like educating, and I'm trying to do that in my own small way. So I guess maybe that counts as activism. I'll take it. But, you know, DeficitOwls has certainly had its ups and downs. Last year, one thing that I thought was quite successful, you know, we try to do this thing every year or so that's called Modern Money Meme Week, and the basic idea is people contribute. You know, we come up with some themes, some simple, you know, whatever MMT topics, and I and other people just in the community make graphics or jokes or whatever that kind of, you know, have to do with those themes. And the idea is just to build some community. Like, you know, MMT, we take it all so seriously some of the times, but we should have fun too. We should have our own culture. We should be able to just relax and be friends together and enjoy this stuff and enjoy each other. So at Modern Money Meme Week, the idea is to build more community, build more of a culture for ourselves, bring people together. And last year, I thought it was super successful, and I was very proud of it. I mean, we try and do it all democratically. So people suggest themes, and they vote on themes, and then people made memes. And you know, the first time we did this a couple years ago, it was kind of my idea, and I was kind of doing it all, and I made most of the memes. Last year, like dozens of people contributed memes, so it wasn't just me. You know, it really shows that we are building a community of people who, you know, can be fun sometimes. And then at the end of the week, people submitted them to like an official kind of contest, and people voted on the best one. And then, you know, one thing DeficitOwls does is we through an online service, we don't actually make any money off this, but we sell like T-shirts and merchandise and kind of that kind of stuff that has some MMT stuff on it. The idea really being just to put conversation starters into people's hands. You know, you go out in public and you're wearing a shirt that says something MMT, and then somebody goes, hey, what does that mean? And then that's an opportunity for you to talk to somebody about it that you wouldn't otherwise have. So that's kind of the idea. So, you know, the winners of that contest got free T-shirts. So I guess, you know, it helps start those conversations. It helps build culture. It helps build community. It helps, you know, strengthen these bonds and stuff. So good times were had by all. I was very pleased. So last year was pretty successful. This year, not so much. So as I've transitioned into this PhD program, I'm finding just an unbelievable amount of demands on my time, and I really have not been able to devote as much time to DeficitOwls as I would have hoped to in the last year, or really 2 years. So this year, it would have been this week if we could have gotten it together, but it will have to be postponed, or possibly, postponed till next year. I guess we'll see. So, one major problem I've had with DeficitOwls is, kind of getting more people on board and being able to have a more efficient structure that can delegate things and get stuff done. And that I've just found that has been overwhelmingly difficult for me in this quasi-activism experience of building a structure, building an organization, getting other people in, getting them to take responsibility. It's hard. It's very, very hard. And I don't know that I've found a good solution for that yet, in part because I haven't had the time. Finding the time is just so difficult with this kind of stuff, with these passion projects that are in addition to all the crazy stuff that we all have going on in our lives these days.
Saving the world and all that stuff. Okay, so let me ask you, have you noticed anything in particular that you see activists do? Basically, when I say activist, an MMT activist is just someone who is not formally educated, but they know a decent amount. They're smart people who are not formally educated. That you've seen, that you would think, that you've seen sort of a trend of mistakes or something you might recommend, and how would you deal with that? Or how would you recommend that people deal with that?
I guess one thing might be, it might be best to, we kind of have this sort of, like I said, it's kind of about structure. We sort of have this sort of free-for-all where, people get excited about MMT, which of course I'm all for, and then go out and try and tell people, which of course I'm all for. But then you have, sometimes people get over their heads. People who don't know much about the topic find themselves in debates with, academic economists or something like that, or policymakers or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think that we as a community could be more strategic about those kinds of things. We could be better about quality control and about delegation in terms of, making sure that the high-level debates are kind of being had by people who have the expertise and the experience to give those correct answers the first time, and then that the people who are new and excited can be steering new people towards material that is appropriate for them, instead of either just launching them into, some, really detailed central bank operations thing that goes over everybody's head, or into some really simplistic, thing that's way below what that person really needs. So I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we should pick our battles and pick our audiences a little more strategically, because so much of the issue, the growing pains of the MMT world is having these days is with these kind of miscommunication issues, and a lot of it has to do with vocabulary, the mainstream and MMT sort of use some words to mean different things or different words to mean the same thing, and that's because of these diverging intellectual traditions of where the two schools of thought come from. So we think in different terms, and sometimes there's talking past each other there. But then sometimes the talking past each other happens just because, mainstream people will be like, oh, MMT thinks that. And we'll be like, well, we never said that. And they'll say, oh, but some random person on Twitter said that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the blaming Bernie Sanders for some outlier supporter for saying something stupid. Same thing. Right.
It's exactly like that. It's people rush to judge MMT as a whole because of what somebody who has done 1 hour of reading said about it on Twitter, So I think we could stand to manage that stuff a little bit better. And I guess it's sort of about humility, is pick your battles and know what questions you can and can't answer. And I realize that new people are very excited about this because I was very excited about it. But I think as a new MMTer, the best thing you can do is steer people to check out sources, to read things and watch videos and stuff like that, while you continue to build your own knowledge base and observe other people debate until you really feel like you're strong enough to understand the nuances of what's going on here. So I'm not saying that new people shouldn't participate. I'm just saying they should participate differently.
It's actually very difficult to understand where those boundaries are for a few reasons. Number one, when you learn MMT, I don't know how to exactly say it, but the first sort of layers of what people generally learn about MMT, what I learned about MMT is, I don't know if it's political or if it's logic, but there's something powerful and magic about it, but it's not the underlying topics. Like I read your paper, which we're going to get into soon, and I understood the general thrust of it, but I struggled with the economic stuff underneath it. But I have no experience to even determine, unrelated to your paper, I had no experience to even determine, like I thought MMT was economics for a long time, and it's not. And I don't quite understand how it works, and we don't need to get into that now, but MMT is not economics. It's like a lens to look at economics or something like that. And the conference last year was, as far as I understood, the second international MMT conference in New York City last year, September last year, and then actually the third one is the end of this week. Last year's conference was significantly geared towards creating a community between activists and experts, economists and scholars. And that was exciting for me. But since that conference happened, everyone's just so busy. So I find it that there really isn't that much of a regular community, that there is really there's not that much guidance in a positive sense. But when I make a mistake, just speaking for myself as an activist, when I make a mistake, I definitely hear from experts. That's wrong. That's wrong. And it's very strong in a totally appropriate way because it's important. It's important. But that makes it very difficult. That makes it a really hard experience. And especially from thinking of, last year's conference gave me the impression that there was this very important goal of creating a community. But that sort of, I don't want to say disappeared, but it felt like it was, I can't think of the term, like the expectation was set too high. And for me personally, my issues are largely not knowledge. My issues are emotions, that my emotions are significantly far behind the knowledge and the ambition of what I'm capable of. I'm capable of big things. My emotions are a little bit, a few years behind me. So that's like and when I get negative responses in a totally appropriate way, I need that feedback. That makes it really difficult for me. So transitioning to an expert, I am applying to be a master's student. I'm applying to John Jay right now. I've written my entrance essay and all this, but part of what I'm struggling with is I have my goals. I want to be my ultimate goal is I want to be an advisor to federal candidates. I want to advise them on policy. I want to, and eventually, obviously, federal elected officials. And another one, three. Number one, that's number one. Number two is to have some sort of resource for people who just discover MMT to ease their transition into activism, to make it more clear of where those boundaries are. This is what you can talk about. These are the basic things that you should read before you dare try and talk about this concept. You need to sort of understand this, see these videos, read these books or articles or whatever it is. So that's number two. And then number three is to just teach the masses, and particularly the disadvantaged masses, to be able to go to like African-American and foreign immigration groups, Mexican poverty-based groups, and to actually teach them, because they're the ones who need it the most, and to actually do it through their leaders, to approach their leaders, teach their leaders, gain their trust, understand their community better before you try and talk to the people. So those are my three dreams, goals. And I wonder, as you, someone who's a little closer to, understanding this in a more broad sense, deeper sense, are those goals realistic are there steps between here and there? Or, does that make sense? I know I put a lot out there, but just take what you will.
Sure. So I have a couple thoughts. I mean, first of all, I just want to say, like, I have I think, relatively anti-elitist view of credentials. I mean, you say I'm on my way to becoming an expert. I think the word expert scares me because, I live with 2 other students in the PhD program, the PhD economics program. There's a running joke in our household about how all of us feel like we're never going to be good economists, because there's just so much to learn and we're never going to get to any of it. So, I take that word expert with a very, very large grain of salt, and the credential also is not necessarily all that meaningful. I mean, what we're doing, this training is just like, mostly it's reading. You read papers, you read books, you do some writing, some sitting and thinking, that's kind of what goes on around here. And, somebody else who's read the exact same books as me but doesn't have the credential, perfectly legitimate, point of view or whatever. So that's that there. So I don't believe you need like a fancy PhD in order to be talking to economists or policymakers. You just sort of need to be confident that you kind of have some idea of what you're talking about and that that you believe the things you believe for a reason, and you've looked into the nuances and you've satisfied yourself that it makes sense to the best of your ability, and that you're open to being proven wrong and hearing alternative explanations and stuff. In terms of MMT as a community and like shepherding new people, I think it's true. There's certainly a lot of room for us to improve that. And I think I use the phrase quality control, although that maybe is a little bit dehumanizing. But yeah, I think you're right. We don't really have a lot of guidance for new people. I'm not sure what part of the issue is that I don't know that there's a typical, first part of the issue is, nobody's in charge of this thing, right? This is like a grassroots social movement. And, DeficitOwls is not in charge. The Modern Money Network is not in charge. Stephanie Kelton is not in charge. It's people in different places who have an idea of what needs to be done and how to do it, and are just doing, whatever they can, the best they can to make some of that happen. And some of it works and some of it doesn't. And so it's an evolutionary process. It's a learning process, and we're all kind of stumbling in the dark, I guess. So I'm not sure if that's reassuring or not, but I do think you're right that we as a community could do better to bring people in and get them up to speed in a slightly more systematic way. I think that's what Bill Mitchell's MMT University idea is supposed to do.
I can't wait till that starts.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I don't really know where they are on the progress for that. But, hopefully when that gets up and running, it will help out with the effectiveness on that kind of thing. Kind of in the meantime, creating substitute materials, or, some people have created kind of websites that aggregate stuff, like the We Can Have Nice Things website or the Modern Money Basics website, that kind of say, like, if you're new to this, maybe start here. Those are all steps in the right direction. But yeah, that is definitely a weak spot for us as a community.
And let me hold whatever you say. I mean, remember what you're, particularly for, I'm ambitious. And so I hit those walls of, sometimes going into things that I shouldn't be doing more often than I think some other people, because I can only do the best that I can do, because I don't have regular communication with, and I understand experts is maybe not the best term, but I'm just going to use that because it's easy right now. I don't have regular communication with experts to say, to pass my things by to. So I have a community of, modern monetary theory for world progressives, which is my primary group where I ask questions. And, you do the best you can, but, it's like the more ambitious you are, the more difficult it is. I think ambitious is a good thing. And I think ambition is a good thing. But when there's no guidance, it makes it quite difficult, because you'll hit those walls of being inappropriate more often, because how can you not? So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. it's a balancing act that our community is still figuring out. You know, we don't really want somebody who has read a single blog post about MMT to be arguing with, you know, Larry Summers on Twitter or something, because that's going to make these conversations harder for us down the road, you know. But at the same time, we do need to provide people better ways to get acquainted, better tracks or pathways or what have you. And I don't want to be discouraging ambition at all. I guess if I'm preaching for anything here, is humility, which is, you know, you should go into a conversation with a sense of like, here are the kinds of conversations that I can participate in and meaningfully contribute. And here are the kinds when maybe it would be better for me to just sort of observe and take it in and evaluate as it's going on. Like, is this making sense to me? You know, have I seen this before? You know, that kind of thing, I guess. Is that helpful at all? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it is helpful. I mean, it's being much more sensitive with the steps that you take.
Yeah, and we're a movement, you know, and we may not have like a distinct leader or whatever, or distinct hierarchy, but we do have kind of broad goals as a movement. And so if you're about to, you know, participate somehow, you know, you should keep in mind whether or not what you're going to do is going to support those goals in the long term or not. Because there's some ways, some things you could do that might feel really good in the short term, that actually hurt us in the long run. And so we have to be careful about things like that.
Right.
I mean, One thing I will say is, in terms of the disadvantaged masses, I mean, you know, I don't, like I said, we're kind of a grassroots social movement. And so to the extent that we're courting, you know, some community that you might personally not be a part of, I think it's important that, you know, we're not, like, I wouldn't want to create the impression that we're going to like go into somebody's community and force feed them this knowledge that we believe they must have, you know, for their own good. You know, really what the ideal situation is to get different communities on board with us to kind of interpret this in their own way and do what's best for their communities. You know, have you heard about the Our Money movement?
I actually was just thinking about that. Yeah. As you were saying, that reminded me of it.
That's a great example of a community that you know, was not originally part of us, but came to us, I think, largely on their own, and has decided this is important, and they're going to stand up in their own way and do something about it. And I think that's exactly what we want, is people to take this knowledge into their own hands and use it the way they will for their own benefit. You know? And
I do think it's very important that you don't just go to the community, because you can't know what the community wants, how they are, how they perceive things, and that you go to these communities through their leaders. You first approach my philosophy, my personal philosophy is you go to their leaders and you say, can I introduce this to you? And number one, you gain the trust of them, then you can gain the trust of their community. And then also you can determine how to best communicate with their community. And also what does their community want? Do they want it at all? So that is how I think you can avoid the problem of going in and, you know, I am your savior. That would be awful. That would be awful, which is why I think that's sort of the step that I think makes sense. That, as you said on the MMT podcast, getting people to listen, getting people in the door is by far the hardest problem. Once they're in the door, we're golden, because it's convincing. It's obviously convincing. If not that it's 100% correct, that it's certainly worth further investigation. But people are so busy. Society makes us so busy.
Yeah, that's certainly true. But you know, the ideal situation is that, you know, maybe it starts out as like, we're the MMTers and here's something we're taking to your community, but the ideal, you know, end game for that is that they become us. We become, you know, them. Like those people, whoever they are now part of our community and have a voice in our community and have a leadership role in our community, so that, you know, that this us versus them thing kind of fades away. And then when you talk about MMT as a community, you know, that includes the folks at Our Money. They're they're leadership figures in the MMT world now, because that's what they wanted.
And their amazing article that Delmon Coates, the Reverend Coates, did last week, signed by 22 African-American faith leaders it was fantastic. The last sentence says something to the effect of, we stand with the MMT economists to invade the ivory tower. Like, wow.
Love it. Love it.
All right, so a couple more questions regarding this, activist to expert transition. Number one, they're basically the same question. What advice do you have to people, to activists that are really getting into it and that are considering getting more serious, as far as what to learn before even considering education, formal education, how the process of applying, and even in school itself. So that's number one. And then the other one is the specific, important papers and books that you would recommend they read before they even get there. And actually, I should say, before you even answer this, I am amazed that no matter how many times you read a paper or a book, that it's like a completely different paper or a book every single time, because your stage of learning is so different. So, yeah.
So in terms of going for formal education, I think you have to do it with a pretty clear goal in mind. I mean, like you have a pretty clear goal, like you're talking about. You want to advise policymakers and stuff. It's not something that you probably want to do just for fun, and the reason is because it's expensive. So, like, I happened to be well situated at that time in my life where I had been saving money for a few years, and I was I wanted to change careers anyway, and I knew I wanted to do this academia thing. It was the logical step for me to go to school. If you are on a good path already, then you just want to learn stuff about MMT, then I wouldn't say don't do it, but it's like this formal education thing. You wouldn't want to derail an otherwise successful path that you've got going on or whatever. So I think having some idea of what you want to do, it's a big commitment. So that's that. Let's see. It is school, and I hadn't been in school for a while, so I had to kind of get back into the swing of that. Homework and writing papers and reading assignments and stuff. And I had to dust off my math skills. Fortunately, I'm pretty good at math, but, if you're going to do any kind of economics, including heterodox economics, there will be math, and you do have to be able to make sense of it. So I had to kind of polish that back. That's fine. And so the final thing would be the things that you think people should read or view before they even consider that step. Like I'll give you a couple, which is one, Nathan Penkis recommended Fred Wee's History of Heterodox. So the papers, the most important works that you think people should take a look at. Sure. I mean, in terms of just kind of general overviews, the Randy Ray book, the 2015 Modern Money Theory book, that's the second edition, is like probably the go-to place for kind of intro to MMT it's not exactly a PhD level book, but it's also not a walk in the park either. Lower level than that, of course, would be like Mosler's 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds, which I think is probably the best introduction to thinking in the MMT lens for somebody who's not really into economics at all. The Understanding Modern Money book is a great book, but a little more sophisticated, not quite written for a general audience. The chapter on the history of money is hard.
That's Randy Ray's book?
Yeah, that's Randy Ray's 1998 book. Then there's a handful of classic papers. The Kelton 2000 paper is a classic. The Mosler Forstat or natural rate of interest is 0 is a classic. There's some Fulweiler papers on central bank operations that are kind of classic. I think there's one paper that's like 80 pages long, and it's like central banking operations, the general principles. If you really want to wrap your head around what are central banks, what do they do, that's a great place to go. The literature on chartalism is really good too, tax-driven money. one seminal paper there is Forstatter's paper on how this kind of tax-driven money concept has appeared all throughout the history of thought of economics before it was like really rolled into MMT. If you go on the New Economic Perspectives website, there's like a page called MMT Scholarship. That it's badly out of date. It only goes through like 2012 or 2013 or something, but it's a huge list of links to MMT papers on a whole variety of topics. There's hundreds of MMT academic publications. So there's a lot to read. And what's relevant to you, is going to depend on what your path is, what your interests are,
I actually, for your paper, ended up reading Eric Timoin's 2014 paper, The Interactions Between Treasury and the Central Bank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good paper going into detailing some of that stuff, including the historical aspects.
Yeah, and for me was, you're reading your paper is about, and we're getting into your paper. So reading your paper, it's all Treasury. And so from my point of view, I have always had the consolidated view, which is just calling it the central bank. So I was worried that what am I missing as far as reading your paper? And it turns out that what Eric Timoin's paper says is that you're missing nothing. The central bank, the consolidated view is perfectly valid, because yes, there's weird interactions between the central bank and the Treasury, but when it comes down to it, it's 100% that the central bank will always give the Treasury what they need. I mean, maybe I'm saying not exactly the correct way, but the consolidated view is fine. You can say the central bank, and you're not missing anything as far as accuracy is concerned, because
you can say the government. I mean, I think some people are a real stickler for those kinds of details, and I definitely was at the beginning, where I was, this idea that all government spending creates money. That was a tough sell for me. I really dug into that literature. There's the Bell Kelton 2000 paper. There's Timoin's, I think it's, 2014.
Yeah.
There's Scott Fulweiler's paper on Treasury debt operations, which like a big chunk of that got folded in as a chapter in the Ray 2015 book. So I really dug voraciously into that aspect of it until I was satisfied that really like all the loose ends make sense. But then some other people are not sticklers for those details, and you just say to them, hey, government spending creates money, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. So, it's by the person on that one.
Right. Okay, so your paper.
Today I'm talking with Sam Levey. Sam is a PhD student in economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, UMKC, and a research scholar for the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. He is also a co-founder of DeficitOwls, a prominent MMT activist account on Twitter and a YouTube channel containing nearly 200 short videos demonstrating fundamental concepts of MMT. Sam and I discuss the successes and lessons of a prominent activist, the growing pains of a burgeoning and disruptive community, and advice for activists who are just starting out and those considering taking the leap into a formal education. So welcome to the premiere episode of Activist MMT. Before we get to my conversation with Sam, I'm going to take this first show as an opportunity to introduce myself and how I got to MMT. In episode 2, I will give a brief introduction to modern monetary theory itself. So I am the non-billionaire, non-pedophile, non-dead Jeff Epstein. Yes, this has been a trying few months online. I am a classically trained singer, a former computer programmer, and I'm the father of 2 little boys, 10 and 13. I am also a hardcore Bernie Sanders progressive. In early 2016, I left a high-paying job in order to volunteer for his presidential campaign full-time for 5 months. I ran with Bernie on the ballot in my county, and because of the nature of New Jersey politics, I was one of only around 40 candidates in the country to be personally endorsed by the senator. I also served as a New Jersey state pledged delegate for Bernie Sanders at the Democratic National Convention in July of 2016 in Philadelphia. At the convention, I co-founded Citizens Media TV in order to live stream the proceedings from the Bernie Sanders point of view, with a handful of delegates on the inside and supporters on the outside. By the end of convention week, our coverage reached 1.5 million people. After the campaign was over, I was selected as one of less than 60 of the first batch of finalists for brand new Congress, out of more than 1,500 nominations across the country. Before discovering Bernie Sanders in August of 2015, I was politically asleep. I voted Democrat because I was told that Democrats were the good guys and Republicans were the bad guys. What Bernie taught me was that a major cause of society's problems is not any particular flavor of political stripe, but the corrupting influence of money. He also taught me that, although I am personally, individually responsible for my own problems and anxieties, our government is responsible for creating a society, an environment in which those problems are minimized. Despite my age, I consider this experience with Bernie Sanders during the 2016 campaign to be a milestone in my transition from adolescence to adulthood. Like Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. before him, Bernie Sanders believes the solution to be an economic Bill of Rights, a dignified job, wage, benefits, and retirement, free health care and education, affordable housing, and a livable environment. We have been demanding and preaching about these things for generations, yet here we are in 2019, more desperate than ever and on the brink of climate and societal collapse, and we still don't have any of these things. So why not? Why don't we have them? This is the question that I started to ask. Why don't we have what we need to not die? In February of 2018, I got my answer. Modern monetary theory, or MMT. Before discovering MMT, I was economically asleep. Like almost all of us, I was thoroughly convinced that actually getting what we need to prevent and stop our death, suffering, bankruptcy, and unemployment would somehow be worse than our death, suffering, bankruptcy, and unemployment. This is how I understand mainstream economics or neoliberal economics, or as I call it, hopeless economics to be. MMT demonstrates that our governments are capable of vastly more than we are told. That is its fundamental insight. So in February of 2018, I was talking local politics on the phone with my friend Jeff Ginter. Jeff and I actually talk about how we met in episode 3. Jeff interrupted me and said, "You really need to understand how the economy works." He proceeded to talk to me for an hour. Before then, I never cared about or followed economics at all, let alone heard of MMT. Economics, I thought, was just not for me. Because of this, I was an empty vessel. I was not confident in my hopeless economics, so I had little to refute what Jeff was telling me. After our initial conversation, I saw some big pieces hanging in the air, and I could tell they were a big deal, but none of them connected, so I found it very confusing. Over the course of the next month, Jeff and I did 2 live streams on the Facebook page Real Progressives, so Jeff could continue to introduce me to the basics. It was a special experience, because many people who already knew MMT witnessed my eyes open, and I met some excellent and helpful allies in the movement. So once again, my life was changed, this time by MMT. I started interviewing people to learn more, and I interviewed others to introduce them to what I already knew. I soon started a weekly live stream on Real Progressives where I gave the same introduction to MMT over and over again for months, each time improved based on the incredibly helpful feedback and support that I received from members of Real Progressives. A few months later, I approached stand-up comedian and progressive video journalist Graham Elwood. He invited me onto his YouTube show for what was a magical experience. I, along with his viewers, got to watch Graham's eyes open, and in turn, his viewers became more friendly and enthusiastic about MMT. I have since appeared on Graham's show 6 more times, and have also arranged appearances by PhD economists Stephen Hale and Fidel Kaboub. I informally presented a much sharper version of what I showed Graham at the September 2018 Second Annual International MMT Conference in New York City. I have since rewritten this presentation, the most recent version being much deeper, accurate, and interesting. I have presented this new version regularly in public and in private. Finally, a personal note. As those who know me best will understand, my biggest challenge is my emotions. I am smart and ambitious, and I have strong opinions. But because of my personal history, my emotions are sometimes not capable of handling the consequences of my ambitions. A big part of my problem until now has been trying to pretend in public that this is not the case. I have a long way to go, and I have to believe that I'm not the only one experiencing this. So thank you especially to those who have along the way forgiven me some of my, let's say, more raw emotions. Speaking of ambition, I am now applying for a master's degree in economics at John Jay University in New York City. I was going to start in January, but I've decided to postpone this until September. I am going to spend this time reading papers and books and interviewing MMTers in an effort to get up to speed before I begin my formal education. So if all goes as planned, I will have just begun my master's when I see you at next year's 4th Annual International MMT Conference in Washington, D.C. Thank you for listening, and now on to my conversation with Sam Levey.